The dread pirate Roberts has been captured and is in the brig. He'll be walking the plank soon. So Silk Road shut down, and every gloating media puppet in the world went out and wrote the sensationalist article, Silk Road is down, Bitcoin is dead. We told you so. And of course, within a week, they were all proven wrong, after Bitcoin recovered to the exact same price it was before the capture. Turns out, Silk Road wasn't a big deal for Bitcoin, as factually shown by the price deviation. If a price can recover from that kind of drop within 72 hours with barely a blimp, that means it wasn't really dependent on Silk Road in the first place. So Silk Road really didn't make a big impact on Bitcoin. So what will be the effect of the shutdown of the Silk Road? What do you guys think?
I think there's an effect on Bitcoin, the Streisand effect, which is when you try to ban something or say it's bad, people get curious and say, ooh, what's that? I want to learn about Bitcoin. And, there was a small decrease in Bitcoin price for a few minutes. I managed to snag some at the low. I'm very proud of that.
I bought in at 85. Yay!
Woo! Cheap Bitcoins for a few minutes if you can get them. But then they went right back up within a couple of hours. And now they're actually higher than they were before the Silk Road was shut down. And there are more online drug marketplaces popping up. So I don't think the FBI has succeeded in winning the war on drugs. It seems like they kind of just cut off the head of a hydra and 8 million more just spin to place, and more people are interested in Bitcoin. Maybe that's because the war on drugs is a failure?
The Silk Road thing was interesting. It was the price was down for a little bit longer than that. I also bought, although it was at 110, not 80. Good job getting below 100. I think really what we're seeing here is that people respond emotionally before they respond in a way that makes sense. And so here, if the thought had been that Silk Road was a thing in your mind that was supporting the price of Bitcoin, then there you go. You would have been one of the ones selling, thinking that this would have been, the end of it all, or at least the end for right now. And then, we get through it and come out the other side of it, and it's obviously very different than that.
Well, it certainly didn't help that far too many media organizations decided that Schadenfreude was the right approach, and just gleefully mean and nasty reporting, of course completely fact-free, was the theme of the day, and I was not surprised by that. But as Stephanie says, it's the Streisand effect, right? Whatever the hell you want about Bitcoin, just spell it right. And guess what? They did. And 3 months from now, that wave of publicity that hit every single national newspaper and TV station around the world is going to turn Bitcoin into a $250 currency. Simple as that.
We don't know so much about what's happening with this Silk Road bust, right? We don't even know if this is something that actually happened. It's sort of weird, but if you look into how this news broke, it wasn't through FBI sources. It wasn't, in the past, we've pulled stuff from like DEA lists, where they have releases that go up all the time. It didn't come through any official sources whatsoever, because it happened just days after the US federal government, quote, shut down. And so one of the things they stopped doing with that is they took down as many of them as they could, and they stopped maintaining the other ones of all their websites. The only place we've actually seen these affidavits talking about the charges filed and the arrests are actually through a couple of, scanned copies that made their way onto the internet, one of which through a berkeley.edu portal, and one of them popped up on Scribd, I think. But it's not like we're getting these from official sources, and I don't think we've seen the government actually acknowledge that this happened. So are we sure that this happened?
Well, it's a bit of a mess, really. Not only do we not know it's happened, but in fact, a lot of the basic facts of the case seem rather strange. Now, anybody who's been following the Silk Road for the last several years has probably heard repeatedly that the Silk Road has changed hands, and that the Dread Pirate Roberts isn't the same Dread Pirate Roberts who made Silk Road in the first place, but actually the third or fourth owner in a long chain of owners. Now, if you look at the affidavits, they hint that this person is actually the same Dread Pirate Roberts who started Silk Road and has held it in one continuous chain of ownership. That doesn't really rhyme. But, at the end of the day, we won't know the truth. That's the simple answer. This is a drug case, and when drug cases happen in the US, truth goes out the window. As you've noticed in any of the coverage of this, the one word that you wouldn't see is the word allegedly. That's only afforded to people with power. And so at the moment, Allegedly, they've arrested someone who allegedly goes by Dread Pirate Robots. You could see this. I mean, the coverage was really obnoxious. NPR, a liberal radio station, was saying Lawrence was arrested and disclaimed any use of aliases. He also goes by the alias Dread Pirate Roberts. Hey, hang on a second. Didn't you just say he disclaimed everything? Didn't you need a bit of an allegedly in that sentence? So you see, this is what's happening. I think the ultimate outcome of Silk Road was that this was an attempt to smear Bitcoin and an attempt to end the war on drugs. So now, tens of thousands of people have to go back to street corners where they can get shot to buy their drugs. Great job, FBI. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's really not about safety. And the war on drugs is a failure. I mean, it hasn't stopped anyone from doing drugs. If this really happened, then a couple of people got busted. At the end of the day, people are still buying drugs with Bitcoins, and they're still buying a hell of a lot of drugs with cash.
The war on some drugs is an unqualified success. It has led to increases in purity and decreases in prices across all drug categories across the entire planet. And it's made law enforcement probably one of the most lucrative state operations across the country through asset forfeiture laws. Basically, it's a Ponzi scheme.
You know, one of the interesting things about these like hidden sites and these hidden illicit markets, once you've built up reputation in them, like so Silk Road has been around, I think 2-3 years. Over that amount of time, it became a very well-respected and trusted place to do business. And now that stands in contrast because when you're running websites like this, you go out of your way and do everything possible to hide your identity. The whole reason for having these hidden services is so that you don't have to disclose your identity. Ulrich was charged not necessarily with the sale of drugs, even though I saw him repeatedly referred to as a drug kingpin. He was actually charged with conspiracy to distribute and a couple of these other things because he wasn't actually touching any of the product. He was creating a market. And then through the trust that that community had in him, he was able to essentially share that trust out. He was the common, or Silk Road was the common factor tying it all together. Now, one of the things that occurred to me when this went down is that cuts both ways. And just as now you no longer have that trusted hub, it's not like that demand has gone away. So if you're a person who uses these services, you'll really want to be careful in finding your next one, because ones that have gone up, in the interim or in the months beforehand, I'd be looking at them real hard as honeypots and saying, who is the person actually running this business? Who is the person actually doing that? Because the timing is suspect.
If you want to get a successful honeypot, you'd need to have some kind of seized stash of Bitcoin so you can run sting operations.
Oh, wait.
Wait.
Right.
I think a lot of people have wondered about Atlantis, because that sprung up a couple of months ago, kind of around the same time frame that the FBI said they had copied the server of the Silk Road, and then it curiously shut down a couple of weeks before Silk Road did. So what was going on there? What was the connection?
I don't know if we'll ever know with something like that. I mean, there are lots of reasons to start one of these things up, and I think that there are arguably even more reasons to shut one of these things down, especially if you think that you somehow leaked your identity in doing so. Ultimately, these illicit markets are going to be around, but they're going to get to be such a small part of the overall cryptocurrency ecosystem that I think we're going to stop paying attention to them entirely. I mean, I think that this is probably only the first or second time that we've ever even talked about Silk Road on Let's Talk Bitcoin. And again, it's because while 2 years ago, these might have been really, really core features of the economy for the people who were using it, right now, that's just not the case.
Yeah, that's the bottom line. 2 years ago, if this had happened to Silk Road, it could have been a mortal wound for Bitcoin. A year ago, it would have been a bad wound for Bitcoin. And this time, it was barely a scratch. This is really an evolutionary process. Silk Road was just the latest in an attempt to make an online marketplace. This one had the advantage of a pseudonymous currency, and the next one's going to do it better. So all that the feds have achieved in this particular case is to create Fed-resistant strains of Silk Road as the very next step.
Hey guys, maybe the federal government will wage a war on Bitcoin, and then Bitcoin will become more popular and more ubiquitous all the time. It seems to happen with everything else, right? The war on terror, the war on drugs, war on poverty.
Well, we do seem to live in a bit of an upside-down society. I hope that there's a less adversarial future ahead of us, I have to say, because while, yeah, it can happen, at the same time, It's not going to be easier. It'll be much harder. And it'll be much harder for people to get involved. And it'll be much harder for legal businesses to get involved. I mean, this is the same reason why you don't see, legal drug businesses that have a huge focus on health and a huge focus on, the quality of their product and stuff like that, because lacking the legal reasons to do that, they're just not there. It's easier to go with the lowest common denominator. And so that's what you see in these markets. I don't want that to happen to Bitcoin. I don't want it to become an exploitative thing where the only people who are willing to sell you Bitcoin are criminals because only criminals are allowed to have them. That's a bad outcome for me.
Well, unfortunately, it seems like it's really, really difficult to have a legal business that sells or buys Bitcoin or both. I don't know if we're quite at the criminal stage yet, but certainly what happened, getting ripped off with the counterfeit bills, it's a direction that Bitcoin could go in.
I think Bitcoin is going in the opposite direction. I think a lot of the first applications of Bitcoin were naturally the areas where you had the maximum friction in fiat currencies or through legal reasons. So cross-border transactions and illicit goods. But at the end of the day, listen, you're not going to have Bitcoin suddenly represent a market that's different from the market for other currencies. Drugs are the second important purchase in commodities in every country after food. It's as simple as that. Human societies place drugs second after food on their purchasing list. We see this in every society since the beginning of time. So, the war on drugs here is attempting to go against nature, but Bitcoin will reflect the cultural standard, and that involves drugs. It's always going to be easier to buy drugs with fiat, and fiat will always be the main funding mechanism for drugs.
There's another black market, I guess, industry, at least in the US. In some places of the world, it is not black market at all, that I just haven't heard much about in connection with Bitcoin, and that's the sex trade, prostitution, the oldest profession. Where's the online marketplace for prostitutes and Johns to meet and use Bitcoin to do some kind of a deal? I haven't heard of it. Do you think it's out there?
I've read a couple of Reddit posts about various things like that popping up, but it's not, and that's probably interesting. I wonder what it is about Bitcoin that's not particularly appealing to sex workers. My guess, it's control. Physical control of the currency is one of the main ways by which a pimp will control their sex workers, not allowing them to carry enough money to run away, for example. That's a classic scenario in prostitution. Usually the pimps will basically hold the money and not allow their sex workers to control it because they'll run away. So Bitcoin actually makes control of money harder, and it makes it easier for one of the sex workers to gather money and have it outside the control of their pimps.
So maybe it wouldn't be appealing to a pimp situation, but for a self-employed sex worker, it could be incredibly empowering, right? If they
Absolutely.
were able to have control of their own earnings and have an irreversible way, if the client has to pay in advance and Bitcoin transactions are irreversible, there's less chance for them to get ripped off, right? And then they have full control of their own money. So yeah, I kind of see an opportunity there, I guess, if somebody's in that profession, but curious
Possibly,
why it hasn't got on yet.
I think because at the end of the day, pimps do provide a security service, as much as that's horrible and everything, but they do provide a security service. And of course, a freelance sex worker, while they may be able to control their money, would lack that security. So that's part of the reason you don't see that.
Right. And again, something else to keep in mind is that we talk about Bitcoin like it's impossible to steal it, but that's actually actively not true, especially if you're talking about hot wallets on like a phone or something like that. I mean, I can see a solution where like you don't have the private keys on your phone, you just have the ability to receive money, and then it goes somewhere else that you're not carrying with you. But on my phone until fairly recently, I had an unlocked wallet that wasn't encrypted necessarily because I was, doing a lot of business with it fast, and it was much more convenient to have it like that. So, there are security precautions that you can take, but even then, getting someone to make you give them your password relative to stealing your wallet, it's actually not that much harder. So the issue is it has to be not possible to steal it.
There's a mnemonic used for multi-factor authentication, which is something to steal, something to chop off, and something to beat out of you.
What about other types of sex work besides just prostitution, like the ones that are sort of legal in the U.S., like dominatrixes, strippers, foot models, that kind of thing? there's an opportunity for them to use Bitcoin. They already have maybe some sort of security services available in the places where they work, or maybe they're self-employed and they've taken care of that themselves. Sometimes it seems to me probably the dominatrixes don't have to worry about that too much.
Yeah.
But,
I think that probably there are some circumstances where that makes sense, but the ones that seem to jump out to me are ones that are online. You know what I mean? Because that's the real problem, is that there are already solutions to anonymous or pseudonymous person-to-person cash-like systems in real life. They're called cash. So I think that if you can take that same sort of thing and apply it to, you know what I mean, like there's on Reddit, Gone Wild or something like that, where people give Bitcoin tips to people who take off their clothes. I don't really get into it, but the point is that for solutions like that, I can totally see that being applicable, much more so than something happening in real life.
Hey, Bitcoin is empowering. And so if Bitcoin can empower anyone who chooses to use Bitcoin to be empowered, and that applies to any profession, any trade, any type of transaction. All I can tell you is that at least the counterfeit cash I got was in return for Bitcoin and not services. I mean, can you imagine how disappointed I would have been if I'd just been and
Hi, this is Jason King, founder at Sean's Outpost, and you are listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Sean's Outpost is a homeless outreach in Pensacola, Florida, and we are proudly powered by Bitcoin. To date, over 13,000 meals have been fed to the homeless in our area, all purchased with Bitcoin and through the generosity of the cryptocurrency community. Read more about us at seansoutpost.com. Food, shelter, Bitcoin, everybody. Sean'sOutpost.com.